Hi there, I'm gingerzielinski, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's just such a pleasure to be able to host this conversation as we engage in a conversation with Afua Bruce and Amy Sample Ward to discuss their new book, The Tech That Comes Next. As I mentioned, I'm gingerzielinski, Chief Strategy Officer at Dataorg. And we're just thrilled. As Amy mentioned in the chat, this is actually one of their first events. So we feel extremely honored to host this conversation today. In their book, The Tech That Comes Next, Afua and Amy make a strong case that technology can continue to be a powerful tool to achieve social impact, if and only if major shifts take place in how we all work together. I can say, having explored this subject matter for some time now, this book is right on time. We seem to be engaged in conversations in every corner about how to build technology solutions that are equity-centered and inclusive. I'm honored to host this conversation and look forward to diving in and unpacking some of the key themes. The format of this conversation today will be extremely informal. So grab your coffee and sit back, and please be a part of the conversation. We encourage questions from all of you in the audience. So please feel free to use the chat. Nicole, as she indicates in the chat function, will be fielding questions, and we are very comfortable meandering through this complex topic and exploring issues that matter to you all. Without further ado, let's welcome Amy and Afua.
Hi, everyone. My name is Afua Bruce, and I am so glad to join you today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I wrote this book with Amy for a number of reasons, but primarily because my career over the past few years has spanned the federal government. I served in the White House for a couple of years, and have worked with a number of state and local governments across the US, had the opportunity to work with nonprofits all around the world on use of data and data science and AI. I've also worked with some academic institutions as to how do we train people to work in the social impact sector, and how do we really equip organizations to work at the intersection of technology and communities. And so I wanted to write a book that really captured some of what I was seeing, and more importantly, really gives people something to hope for, really help people imagine something new. We spend a lot of time in the tech world talking about some of the harms that technology causes, which are very real, very true. But I wanted to take the best lessons that I've seen from my work around the world, partner with Amy in this, and really help people imagine what we can do differently with our relationship to technology, what we can do differently in how we lead social impact organizations, and what we can do differently with policy makers, with community members themselves, and really all together then work on building a better future, a more equitable future through technology. And so that, to me, is one of the big reasons that now is the time to write this book. So happy to talk about it over the next hour with you all, and look forward to your questions and to a really robust discussion.
Thank you, Afua. Amy, we'll pass it right over to you.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Sample Ward. I use they, them pronouns. I am really excited to be here. In addition to the grand adventure of writing a book with Afua, I'm also the CEO of N10, which, if folks don't know, is a nonprofit organization focused on making sure every mission and every movement can be successful through racially equitable and strategic use of technology. Certainly not a far topic from what we talk about in the book. But just like Afua said, I think part of what really motivated me and us to write this book together was the time that we are in, this moment where technology is having a understanding and a relevance in a way that we don't have to prove. Everyone knows through their own lives what necessities are connected through technology. And at the same time, so much of my personal real world work, N10's work, and more is in making sure that everyone can be part of that, we have at least 42 million people in the US who can't even have broadband. So when we talk about this digital world and all of the magical things that are online, we have to acknowledge that so many people are not there with us. Not only did they not get to prioritize or influence or design what we've built on there, they also can't be part of it now that it's built. And really shifting that entire paradigm so that the folks most impacted by whatever topic we're working on become the folks that are at the center of leading the process. So I know we will dig into that. And I just want to acknowledge in the chat, I see so many folks from so many different places, different countries, different organizations, different sectors even, and really want to just acknowledge that right away to say that whether you're coming from a technology organization or a nonprofit or for-profit, or you're coming from the US or another country around the world, the book is for you. It is for all of you, because it is going to take all of us to actually make a better world. And so I'm really glad that there's so many different folks here, because it really, it like heartens me that this is a conversation we can have across all of those other totally arbitrary, completely unnecessary divides.
Thank you so much, Amy. I certainly echo your sentiments of the necessity of intersectionality as we really start to consider how to be proactive and equitable in thinking about how we build technology. So to get everybody involved, we're going to start with 2 polls. I should say one of the major themes that Afua and Amy bring to the surface is really the tension around risks and rewards. Is that how do we take advantage of technology and all of it has to offer as a tool, not an end, but really a means to an end. And then also develop the mechanisms and the muscle to be able to understand both intended and unintended consequences. So that natural tension between risk and opportunity is really something that all of us need to continue to develop the skills and capability to assess. So in that spirit, we're going to put 2 quick polls up in front of you. So the first poll is, what concerns, hesitations, or biases about technology influence your relationship with digital tools? So please take a moment, fill out the poll. We'll give it just about 30 seconds, and then we'll take a look at the answers and then jump to the second question. Thank you.
I wish the panelists could answer the poll.
True.
We removed the all of the above.
Right. Yeah, you really do have to pick just one.
Yes. Okay, so I imagine that most of you would have said all of the above, given the fact that really across the board that all of these concerns are valid and important. So pretty close, no bell curve here today.
No, but I am not surprised that trust is the highest. I think trust is important to think about when we think about engaging communities who have systemically and historically been excluded from these places. When we're saying, oh, we're just magically going to include them now, trust has to be built and reinforced and rebuilt over time.
Yes, we've actually engaged in another project and are launching a corp tomorrow where we spoke with community-based organizations that are trying to build data ecosystems. And unequivocally, the concept of trust and the time and energy and effort that is required to meaningfully build trust that step cannot be skipped. Go ahead, Afua, I see you jumping in.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that's absolutely right. Trust is so important. I think it's also interesting when we put trust and transparency together, because trust and transparency while both important and both needed, are not the same. And that's also separate from accountability. And so I think really recognizing that to do this work, to do something different, to do something more inclusive, we need to address transparency, we need to address accountability, and we really do need to invest the real time and resources that it takes to build trust within communities and across communities.
Yeah, I imagine we could spend the remaining 48 minutes talking about trust alone. And I appreciate your point, Afua, breaking down the difference between trust, transparency, and accountability, right? They are, again, very much connected, but as we really launch into this new phase of figuring out ways to do this the right way, to repair mistakes of the past, to break down systems that currently are, systemic and institutional in the inequalities that, and having a role in the inequalities that persist. All of us, to use your language, Amy and Afua, need to understand the distinction between those different components and their essentiality in being successful in building the tech that comes next. Let's also think about opportunities. So Neil, if you would mind pulling up the second polling question. Okay. To all of you that are listening in, what do you see as the most, where do you see the most opportunity to use technology to achieve social impact, to improve communication, coordination, and delivery of services, to generate new insight into complex and long-standing problems, or to help existing not-for-profit organizations become more efficient? And again, we're forcing you to make a choice. For the spirit of provocative conversation.
There's an interesting data question in the setup of these surveys.
Yes. Sure. Yes, we should be honest. This is not RCT level. All right. Interesting. So just about half of you articulated that the greatest opportunities to generate new insights into complex and long-standing social challenges. That doesn't surprise us here in the Data.org camp, as you can imagine, but curious reflections from Amy and Afua.
Yeah, I'm not surprised either that one is the highest. I think we will undoubtedly get into this in the next 45 minutes, but I think a big focus of the book and of our personal missions in this world is to separate the idea that technology is a solution. And while that word gets used, humans are the solution. And technology is one of many tools that we can use to get there. And so making sure we don't conflate the work to really address big needs with technology as the thing that address them.
Yeah, and the responses to me, first, all of the response options were good. I would have struggled to pick one of the three. But I think one of the things we talk about in the book is that technology in the social impact sector is just a way to extend an organization's mission. And so I think here, as people are selecting between those options, that's what you really see is that people are focusing on what the missions are of their organizations, what the point of their work is, and the impact they're trying to have. And then from there, saying, what can we do differently? How could we use technology to have those better insights first, and to really use technology as a way to support and extend the mission and not be in conflict with it, not compete with it, not use it if we don't need to use it because it's not the right tool. But I think, again, it comes back to being really mission focused and continuing to operate in that way.
Yeah, we had a very interesting conversation a couple months back, and one of our colleagues made the poignant statement that, you can't fall in love with the tool you're building, or else you will get off track, right? That you actually have to fall in love with the problem that you're solving in order to stay so disciplined in making sure that, hey, if this technology is not the right fit, so be it. And that really is different. I think that is a distinction between our friends in the private sector that are building technology solutions, where they have a different end game. And it is the long fruitful life of that technology. And for mission-driven organizations, the end game is solving a problem. And in some cases, the technology may be paramount to solving that problem. And in some cases, you may find out that indeed it isn't, which changes then how you invest. And it also then changes, how you build out that technology strategy.
Yeah,
so
I
again,
think it's important
ahead,
when we're
please.
talking about end game to acknowledge that there's often inherently a very different proposition in front of folks. Like, I hope that for the most part, folks that are working to address real needs and have a nonprofit or social impact mission, like the end game is that you are irrelevant, that you close, that you are not needed, like poverty doesn't exist, or whatever, big, huge topic you're working on. And that necessarily means that the technology that got the organization there isn't needed either. But that is not the mindset necessarily, even as you pointed out, Ginger. We want these tools to grow and build and evolve, but hopefully that evolution means they're not needed. And I think for some technologists or technology companies, that is a harder kind of reality to come to terms with, because why would you want to make something that goes away, right? Like, why would you want to make something that isn't needed anymore? But again, to your point, if we're focused on the problem and not focused on trying to solve that problem, then it's less about the tool, and it's easier to process that feeling and that mindset. But I think we've seen this even today, the idea that an organization is so in love with that problem that they're subconsciously rather, making sure that they're staying in business, right? Like, they are not solving the problem. They are part of continuing it so that they too still have a job, or they have an organization, or those processes are still in place. And I think part of what we're talking about in this book, and I think lots of folks, I recognize names in the chat, I know folks on the webinar today have these conversations too, of how do we get past just kind of processing and living in a world where this is the work of what we do. Like, we have an entire sector that just provides basic needs and supports communities, right? Like, how do we get past doing that, right? It's not just the efficiency of our organizations, it's the success of our missions, right? And again, technology, hopefully, is one of many tools that does help us get over that and address our missions, completely address them, but it isn't going to be the only thing that gets us there.
So
solutions in the chat. We welcome your solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key points that, we touched on in the book is really, it comes back to communities and who are we solving for, who are we designing for, and who sort of is setting the targets and the metrics for success. Because, I think there can be a temptation, there is a temptation to set a success metric based on an organization's needs, or based on a particular technology, especially if you've fallen in love with the technology, to use your language, Ginger. And when you set these rules or these metrics or these expectations based on, without really being informed by the community, without incorporating the community, and without really showing and providing ways for the community to have agency and to have ownership of some of the solutions that affect them and they have to live with, there can be a real mismatch. And so I think that's then when you can fall victim to the temptation to fall in love with the problem and not the solution, and really focus on spending a lot of time and effort on proving that you might have a right attack for the problem, and losing sight of what's the solution. What are the needs of the community that we're trying to meet? How are we engaging that community? How are we listening to the community? How are we reacting to what the community who is using these tools, or who's using these systems and affected by these systems? How is the community faring? How is the community reacting to what we're doing?
Mhm. Well, that was just off our first 2 polling questions. So as you can tell, there is a lot of subject matter, and it's complicated and it's multidimensional. So striking that balance and walking that tightrope is just so important for our social impact leaders in mission-driven organizations and their teams. In chapter 2 of the book, in order to strike that balance, it seems that you really identify the power of shared values and values that are necessary to really think about how we build an equitable world. Amy, would you mind digging in a little bit without spoiler alerts? Because, you know, again, we could not have timed this better. My Amazon delivery person is en route with the book right now, but we don't have it in our grubby little hands just yet. But would love to just hear some more of your thoughts about the importance and essentiality of shared values.
Yeah, totally. I think everything starts with the question of what we're valuing, and at the kind of big meta level of the book, that is one of the biggest questions, right? If we aren't valuing the right things and the right people, throws off the whole process, right? It throws off where we're going to go with that. And so when we wrote the book, Afua and I talked a lot about our own shared values so that we knew what we were going to write together, and that conversation really led us to feel strongly that we needed to start the book by kind of naming what the shared values are or could be, or that we are offering up as the shared values for these conversations and this work going forward. We have 6 of them outlined in the book, and really they're all rooted in, at least as we see the world and understand things, you know, what an equitable world will require our values to be. Those are values that span a number of topics, but everything from, you know, valuing the knowledge and wisdom of actual lived experience, and that is naturally different for lots of different people. And just as you said, Ginger, like having all of those complexities is a bonus that is helpful to our processes. Valuing the participation of a diversity of people, not just in a tokenizing way, but actually a diversity of people in decision making, in planning, in building the technology, the entire process. And of course, valuing accessibility as a priority of everything from the start. That comes kind of part and parcel with valuing having participation and valuing lots of different folks' perspectives and lived experience, but naming accessibility felt really important to us, as well as, you know, valuing that there's a real strength that comes with collectively not just creating a tool or creating a project, but collectively creating the whole vision for a better world, and what that strength offers everyone in trust building, right? To go back to what we were talking about earlier, having folks see and feel that they are part of building this world with all of us helps folks not just, you know, be a part of it and contribute, but feel like they can trust that they get to be part of it. And I think that's really important from me and the experiences I've had, that folks don't feel like they just, you know, sent some message into the ether and are hoping that folks hear it, but really that they feel and see how they are part of building something new.
It's interesting. Another, you know, we've heard this, and Afua, then I'll jump to you for continual reflections. Shifting from like an extraction frame to a co-creation frame. Right. So it's great to ask someone's opinion, but if you then don't loop them and meaningfully create the space for continued participation and partnership and collaboration, you may not maybe even intended, but unintended, be a part of the problem. And a lot of what we heard was, if you're going to ask for people's time and participation, and then they also need to be compensated for it, which is also then stretches, I think, to how we think about when you identify different groups of actors and stakeholders that need to, that this seismic shift that's required, it is from, you know, our tech for good partners, it is from our change makers, and it is from our philanthropic actors, whether that be and public sector actors. So I very much appreciate the considerations that are required across those population groups. Afua, curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I think one of the things Amy touched on, you touched on as well, Ginger, is just the reality of some power dynamics. And when people come into communities and say, we are here to make a change, we are here to help you, and we know what you want because we have read something somewhere, we saw a tweet about it, and this, you know, sort of comprises the information they have. And so that's obviously extremely problematic. And so I think, you know, Ginger, you mentioned going from more of an extractive relationship to a co-creation relationship. I'd push organizations to go even further and really think about what ownership transfer looks like, really think about what elements of the process, if not the entire process, can be pushed towards communities and on communities. Again, the people who know the systems the best, who know their own issues the best, and who have to live with it every day. And so really looking for what does some of that ownership sharing looks like? What are opportunities to push on or change some of the power structures and power dynamics and power imbalances that are present? And how can you use different tools in your toolbox to really help bridge communication gaps, excuse me, and to bridge technology gaps and to bridge information gaps. So what does that information sharing look like? What does that power sharing look like? And what does ownership ultimately look like? And where does that responsibility lie? I think those are some of the things that are really important to examine. You also touched on funders and philanthropists. I think there's a big role for them in this place as well. So really thinking through what it means to allow for budgets to compensate people for their time, for their efforts, for tools to be sustained after the flashy development is done and the initial tweets are sent. What does that look like? How can we think about funding communities, funding technologists, funding social impact organizations more holistically, so the impact that is made is more sustainable? And to Amy's point earlier, so we're actually making measurable progress on issues and not always perpetuating the problems.
Absolutely. And I want to jump to a question in the chat because it's related to exactly what you're talking about, Afua. And since you both have experience in the public sector and government, the question comes in from Hugo. In what ways can governments play a positive role in helping in the future of technology to benefit all members of society? And I think, Amy, speaking to how you started the conversation, especially folks that have been left out of the advances of technology so far. And how do we move from people as consumers of tech to people at the center of tech? Hugo, thank you. That's a fantastic question with, again, lots to unpack.
I'll answer first, and then I'm sure Afua will also have a great answer. I think two things immediately come to mind. One is remembering that governments have a role to play not only in new technology that gets built, but in existing technology today. And just like anyone else, just like an organization can determine its process, you know, governing bodies could say, we can't move this forward without a real level of community involvement. Portland, Oregon is where I live, and it is a interesting and complex place, if we would like to talk about this topic. And, you know, an example that I can share that's been recent, there was some work pre-pandemic on a few pieces, and now there are more pieces that are coming up, and that's around surveillance technology. And instead of saying, you know, hey, we'll consult you the next time we're gonna buy something, they've said we need to have all of these different events, we need to have all these different folks participate, we need to hear what you think, and it needs to be granular. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think that we haven't thought of? You know, really deeply considering how folks think about it. And not, you know, I think a big piece of consulting or engaging communities is remembering that you can't walk up to someone's door and say, what do you think of surveillance tech? Like, that doesn't mean something, right? So making sure, back to our value of accessibility, it isn't just that someone, regardless of any physical aids they may have, can get into your building. It means that people, regardless of what experience or education or background they have, can be in that conversation successfully with you. So I think it's been interesting to be part of and to watch how the city of Portland has approached, making sure that lots of different folks are part of that. And ultimately, I'm sure the process that they're starting right now will be similar to the one a few years ago that ended up with recommendations that were different than what the staff in the city office anticipated would be where they would go, right? And being open to the answer being different than what you thought. I think that the other recommendation I would have that's generalized, and then I'll pass to Afua, is remembering that a really big opportunity and need that policymakers should be taking up is proactively making policy for technology instead of reactively making policy. When we do that, we are saying that we want the biggest technology companies and the biggest lobbyists to be able to dictate what policies we have. And instead, we could have policymakers saying, hey, even if this technology doesn't exist yet, we know we need to prioritize security. We know we need to prioritize self-determination. We know we need to prioritize privacy, right? And prioritizing those things in policy first puts up better guardrails than trying to push existing technologies back into a certain place.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely +1 to everything Amy said, especially about the more inclusive and participatory policymaking processes, which I think we're seeing more and more at the city level, and look forward to seeing that expand to the state level and even to the federal level as well. When I think about government's role in technology, I really think about it in two categories. So one is technology about policy, and the other is sort of policy about technology or policy for technology. And so in the technology for policy category, I think there are a number of ways that governments can use technology better to make policy decisions. So how can we take advantage of some of the tech tools that people are already using in their day-to-day lives, or tech tools that we can develop to really help that participatory policymaking process go smoother? How do you get more input from citizens? How do you communicate in effective ways so that the message can get out to people? They can weigh in and you can take it back as a policymaker and look at it. I live in Alexandria in Virginia, and last fall, for example, the city of Alexandria sent me an email about budgets and said, here are different categories of budgets. Please weigh in on this tool. And it was written in mostly plain English with easy things to sort of vote up, vote down for a participatory process. But that's one way to sort of leverage technology to help improve that communication between community members and policymakers. Just also as a note with the Alexandria program, they did also offer it in paper form and did have community advocates who went out into the community. So back to Amy's point about a number of people not having access to those digital tools, they also provided that. I think that's important to remember. In the category of policy about technology, there are a lot of opportunities there. As Amy mentioned, we can push governments to be more proactive in their policy making about new technologies or existing technologies. What sort of standards are we pushing for as it relates to privacy and security, for example? I think one thing I'm excited to see, and we touch on this in the book a little bit, is how some government agencies are shifting the way they work to better incorporate the use of technology and to really make that policy about technology process better. And so the FCC and the FTC, for example, are hiring more technologists who are working alongside policymakers and regulators and lawyers. And so whereas subpoenas in the past may have only been for an email, now they're for metadata, and they have technologists to help interpret that as they're looking for enforcement of some of the existing laws that have now look a little different when you're in a technology environment. So I think those two categories of tech about policy and policy about tech are some of the levers that government can pull.
Thank you so much. I want to switch gears. So first off, to folks that are listening in and hopefully listening actively, please continue to share your questions because we will get back to them in just a second. But next up, we wanted to ask you both to read a passage from from the tech that comes next and just share some reflections about why you chose it and why you think it's important. So Afua, I understand you actually have a hard copy. So yep, shameless plug, right? It looks beautiful. We would love to hear a selected passage.
Absolutely. And I'm going to let Amy go first because Amy's passage comes earlier in the book than my passage does. So Amy, over to you.
Yes. And I hope to one day also have copies like everyone else. They are somewhere in the mail. Okay, so I have a bit of a passage here to read, and excuse me while I just read it off of my computer. And this is from an early chapter. And I want to just quickly put in the context that, you know, I think folks may have different experience with publishing, and I had always thought people wrote a book and like, you know, it was like years and years of a process, but we actually just wrote the book 6 months ago. And so it is quite fresh. Okay, just for context. We're writing this book while the COVID-19 global pandemic rages on, while protests and legislation related to racial equity continue in the streets and in city halls, and every aspect of our lives grows more dependent on technology every day. Living within these realities, what do we see? Technology companies have pledged to diversify their staff amid various campaigns calling for them to disclose the racial makeup of their management and leadership teams. During the first few months of the pandemic in 2020, many of those same companies offered their products at free or newly discounted options to nonprofits or even individuals. Of course, most had fine print specifying these offers weren't permanent. The philanthropic sector is full of pledges and commitment statements about everything from addressing racial inequity to making their grant making more accessible and less onerous. Such assistance is indeed helpful to social impact organizations, local mutual aid efforts, and every kind of community institution, all of whom have struggled to address skyrocketing needs for critical services and programs with greatly depleted human and financial resources. In the summer of 2020, Deloitte's Monitor Institute reported an estimated 10 to 40% contraction in the US nonprofit sector, with 1 out of every 3 organizations already closed or at risk of doing so. Such pledges and commitments by technology providers and philanthropy are important in many ways, but they are not enough to help many organizations and communities even to stay afloat, let alone to build a better world. The systems and challenges around us, the same systems that created the need for an entire social impact sector to provide life-saving and enriching programs, have also deeply influenced the technology systems, tools, and culture present in our work and lives. We cannot build a better world through only more nonprofits or more inclusive services. If the technology-enabled systems, data collection, and even service models we employ toward a positive mission are themselves causing harm because they're extractive, don't acknowledge our identities, or are inaccessible, we must acknowledge that harm and make change in both the technology tools themselves and in the way we create technology for our needs. An equitable world will require change from every one of us as individuals and organizations and sectors and communities. Critical in this is changing our relationship with technology generally and changing the technologies we have available so that more appropriate, relevant, and equitable technology is available to meet our needs. Even more critical is practicing the big work of envisioning that we can do things differently. We need to ensure that our relationship to technology as individuals and as organizations is one that acknowledges digital tools are just that, tools. Despite the efforts of Silicon Valley to frame every application and service as comprehensive solutions, these digital tools need to be considered with appropriate expectations for what they can actually do and what they can't. Staying focused instead on the goal we have ahead will enable us to select the best tools as and when needed. Keeping our community central in our processes through engaging many people in the goal setting, decision-making, design, and implementation of our work allows us also to be accountable for technology use that causes harm and to make necessary adjustments. As we build toward a better world, those putting technology to work need to be in control of the technology we choose and how it works for us, not the other way around. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yay!
those are some really powerful words. So thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. Why did you choose that?
I wanted to, I mean, this is our first time. This is our first book event. This is, you know, I guess Afua's first time getting to read from the book, my first time reading from a Word document on my screen. And it felt, I wanted to offer a reading that was kind of that had that same opening up feeling that, you know, we have a lot of ideas, Afua and I, and the experiences we've had and the communities that we are part of, but we also know that, you know, like I said earlier, we value that it will be better with more people's experience and ideas and perspective. So I wanted to choose a reading that kind of put us on that path together.
Thank you. And Afua, we would certainly appreciate the opportunity to hear from you as well.
Absolutely. Let me position the book that is in my camera is kind of at a weird angle, so please bear with me. Now that we have examined the roles of key players in the social impact ecosystem and explored how to expand access, it is time to consider how the work to build the tech that comes next might actually be done. We've already discussed how important it is to consider not just what social impact organizations do, but also how they do the work they perform. By involving all staff in strategic conversations about technology, social impact organizations can adopt and increase an organizational culture that keeps the focus on the mission and community instead of on the technical tools, allowing for investments in technology to be more successful. The implemented technology should help with repetitive, straightforward tasks that people shouldn't have to spend their time on, thereby freeing them to work on the many activities that require a human's attention, empathy, and judgment. While changing individual mindsets about technology is important, the impact can be magnified if organizations move away from a scarcity mindset and act on the value of collaboration within the sector. Leveraging shared infrastructure can allow organizations to more quickly launch and sunset programs, as well as test and learn from the work they do. Technologists in the social impact sector serve a broad variety of functions. Whether a technical designer, developer, or implementer of a tool or program, technologists must have deep subject matter expertise. They must understand when to implement complex algorithms and structures and when to mitigate harms, as well as when to acknowledge that the solution needed is not a technical one. Furthermore, social impact or technologists must invest the time to connect with organizations and communities in this space to understand true needs. To strengthen the ties to the community, technologists must be able to include non-technologists in decision-making and plainly explain how the data and tech are used. For technologists to develop technology differently, they must build upon a foundation of security, privacy, and ethical use as they bring non-technologists along in the development process. How money is injected, managed, and used in the social impact sector matters. Funders, whether philanthropists, venture capitalists, or business owners, can fund thoughtful and inclusive development and implementation of technology. Structures can be put in place to give the organizations themselves the space to innovate, the freedom to learn from activities that didn't work the first time, and the flexibility to create based on what the organizations, as the on-the-ground actors, know to be true based on their experiences. Formal communication loops can be built to allow community members to have some agency over decisions directly affecting their lives. Funders must seek ways to ensure proximity to impact. By funding social impact organizations to hire or work closely with developers, the technology solutions are situated in direct relationship to the issues and regions being addressed. This also creates a foundation for iteration and evolution of the technologies in context, where development staff can make changes and improvements as real-world use cases present new opportunities. Solutions that benefit the community can only do so if the community is an active participant in the development, testing, and deployment of these solutions. We must create structures and systems that allow communities to use their own power. This means ensuring communities are resourced holistically. That is, to consider what funding and technical support communities need to support their dreams. Shifting the perception that technology is only accessible by a handful of experts can also be beneficial to communities. Remember that expertise can be learned through traditional educational institutions, but it can also come from apprenticeships or other hands-on experiences. The organizations that support communities can take many different forms. And as we build for what comes next, we should focus first on what we can accomplish, then create the structure. A 501c3, a public benefit corporation, or some yet to be defined construct that will work best to deliver for the community.
Yay!
Yay!
Crowd goes wild. Well, I do want to say thank you. Thank you for allowing Data.org to be a part of this exciting day. So, and Afua, like Amy's passage, there's so much. And these were just two passages. So I am just, and I know I can speak for the audience to say that we're so excited to really continue to learn from your experiences and the insight and the voice and the messages that you've taken the time to put down on paper. You know, the concept of power sharing was so embedded in that passage, Afua. And I have to say also, just changing the positions of and changing roles, and the amount of emotional intelligence that's required. You know, so what you're talking about is being humble in how you're delivering solutions. Listen and be brave enough to act on what you hear. I'm just curious your perspective, like when have you seen that done really well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the passage I read is from our chapter about building what's next. And I think in the subtitle of the chapter, it includes things about shifting power for what's next. So I'm glad the titles we gave also reflect what we wrote in the book. So that's great. So what was really exciting to me about working on this book is Amy and I were able to interview and cite dozens of people in this book from all around the world, working on all different types of technology, everything from data science to building lights, like actual lights for people. And so we were able to highlight a number of examples of this type of work in different spaces. And so whether it was working, you know, highlighting something like a partnership between DataKind and John Jay College on how they could graduate more students and affect, therefore, the quality of life for close to 1,000 more people over 2 years, or whether it was an organization working first in New York City and then in 8 cities around the world called Rescuing Leftover Cuisine to redistribute excess healthy food to people who needed it and people who were facing housing insecurity, or whether it was an organization in North Carolina that trains people from historically underrepresented communities, including children of migrant farm workers, for example, to build solutions that their community needs. In that case, the distribution of services to different migrant farm communities as they migrate across the US. We were able to really highlight a lot of examples for how this work is being done sort of in pockets. So it's my hope, maybe our hope, Amy, that people can take inspiration from these examples of things going well in little pockets and figure out how can we build those together? How can we make those organizations and some of those principles more of the standard? And then what do we do next? We found some really great organizations here. Amy and I think, you know, we're a bit biased, but we think we've got great ideas in the book, but we really want to invite people who are reading the book and engaging with the book to also think about what comes next and to also think about what they can do and what they can contribute and what the world they want to build looks like.
I'm curious, given your experiences and expertise across industries, from the private sector to the public sector to the not-for-profit community, one of the questions that came in, and I'm actually so curious your answers. While you had so much knowledge and perspective to share, did you learn anything that surprised you or that was unexpected? Amy, I'll kick it to you first.
Yeah, I feel like it wasn't necessarily a surprise, but it was a very welcome reminder. And that was, at least in the course of my kind of normal day-to-day work, while NTEN is a nonprofit and our community is, for the most part, nonprofit staff of all different kinds and all different organizations, a lot of my personal job at N10 is talking to tech companies. And as I'm sure folks on this call, regardless of whether you work in a tech company or not, know, it is soul crushing on many days to have conversations about how we move accountability to communities, how we change ownership over to communities, et cetera. And so the welcome reminder was that we're not alone in having those conversations. And so many of the folks that we interviewed and quoted or uplifted their stories, put case studies in the book, were people, when we got on the phone, they're like, oh my gosh, you think this too? You think we also could do it a different way? And that just was so wonderful. And I think to Afua's last point is exactly why we're so excited for the book to be out there, filled with all of these examples of people's work, because we know that folks reading it are going to get to have that same experience of like, oh, I'm not alone. Like, I too think there could be a different way. And I think that kind of will fuel us being able to better organize and build our own power across sectors to make change.
Yeah, and I think similar to Amy, it was just really encouraging to meet sort of like-minded people along the way, or people who are actually doing this work and actually making an impact. Ginger, as you mentioned, I think when we started, a lot of the concepts that we talk about here are really timely. They're things that, across the social impact sector, I think we're collectively struggling with. I think one of the things that surprised me in the process was really sort of the need for a little bit of structure around that. And so each of the main chapters in the book, it concludes with a list of questions for people to ask. So if I lead a social impact organization, what questions might I ask of technologists to help think about what comes next? What questions might I ask of funders? What questions might I ask of policymakers? What questions might I ask of community members? What questions might I ask of other social impact organization leaders? And when Amy and I first outlined the book, we had not anticipated that we would need that type of guidance, or that we would have that section. But really, from the conversations that we were having, it seemed like giving people a little bit more structure, giving people just a few tools to use as they're thinking about what world they're creating next, a more equitable world looks like. A few tools that can help advance that conversation would look like. So that was a surprise to me in the process.
Thank you. I've got two questions for you. So we're going to do a little bit of a speed round. One of them comes from the chat. And it's a question about, again, like striking this balance between taking the time to creative listening and then how to use metrics and KPIs and OKRs. Just curious if you bumped into how can you better use rigorous KPI or advanced research kind of methods and to measure while also be able to build inclusive tech. Just that balance and that striking that natural tension.
I'll just quickly respond, since I know we are coming up in time and you've got two questions left. So I think one thing that I've seen to be successful is to put some of what we're talking about in the KPIs. And so we're talking about having listening sessions with the community, taking input from the communities. So put in your KPIs that you had these listening sessions, that you will hold them, that you will take X percentage of solutions, or that you will incorporate Y percentage of suggestions. I think one of the examples we talk about in the book, they had a product dashboard, essentially a user tracking dashboard, where community members could sort of weigh in on what needed to be done. And so tracking some of those things is what to do. If it matters to you, we measure what matters. And so put some of that in the OKRs.
Excellent. Thank you. Amy, any thoughts on that before I jump to the next one? You're good to go? All right. And so the next one, it's coming. If you had one recommendation or call to action, what's one thing that you think this group, that the participants can actively do, can walk away from this conversation to be a part of the tech that comes next? And Amy, I will pass it to you first.
Yeah, I'll go first, and Afua can have the last word, mic drop. I think that you could do this even if you haven't read the book, but of course we're supposed to say you should get the book. But the real thing that I would love is for more folks to, in conversation, whether that's just with your team, it's with your organization, it's with, product partners or funders or, whatever organization structure, whatever work you're doing, whatever position you're in, to build up a little muscle memory so that you don't have to work to be able to ask questions all the time that says, wait, what are we valuing here? And I think having a question that is open like that isn't saying, hey, I think we need to do X, but is saying, actually, we need to pause and say, what is it that we're valuing? Because that's the root of us changing the direction. If we're trying to change the direction by saying, hey, I think our process should do X, you haven't gone back to the start. And so really building up, it's like in your back pocket, how to just say really comfortably and confidently, hey, I want to stop. Like, what is it that we're valuing here? We could shift so many conversations, especially back to the conversation about power, shift so many conversations when we are talking across sectors, when we are talking between a social impact organization and a funder, or between a funder and a technology company. When we can say, this isn't about right or wrong or who's doing what, this is just between us at this table, what are we valuing? We could really, I think, open up a lot of potential for change.
Thank you. That's awesome advice. And Afua?
I would just encourage people to be bold and to take that next step. I think now, as we've all talked about, now is the time. There are a lot of these conversations that are happening now. And so having a bit of courage and figuring out just what that next step is that you want to take and just doing it, recognize that a little bit of pushback, a little bit of resistance is part of the process, and that's natural for any change process. But really just be bold and take that next step.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for writing this book, for sharing not only the insights that and expertise that you've developed, but also lifting up others' stories, for motivating us that there is power in all of us to build the tech that comes next. And it's up to us. Not to be totally cheesy, but that's chilling and it's powerful. So thank you for creating the space and for your time and effort and for sharing it with us today. And to all of you that are listening in and joining in on the chat and sharing your questions, thank you for the amazing work in which you engage and for your bravery in bringing these concepts to the table and owning them. And I can't wait to see what's next. You leave us very hopeful. So thank you. And I look forward to continuing to collaborate and learn alongside of you both.
Thanks, Ginger. We're the ones we've been waiting for, right? So let's go.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Thank you all. Have a great day.